Rain hammered the steel roof of the sheriff's garage in Millbrook, Kentucky, until it sounded like 1,000 marbles falling from the sky, and Deputy Callum Rutherford felt his stomach drop when Ridge planted his paws on the wet concrete and would not move. The Belgian Malinois, 5 years old and steady as a stone, had never once refused a command in 3 years. His ears lay flat now. A low warning rolled from deep in his chest. Something was inside that brand-new patrol SUV, something that terrified a dog who feared nothing. Before we go on, comment where in the world you're listening from and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a story like this. Callum crouched and tugged the leash a second time, gentle, the way he did after long shifts, when Ridge's paws were sore and his eyes went heavy. "Come on, buddy. Same as always. Just a ride." But this was not the same as always, and Ridge knew it before anyone else did. The old cruiser with the cracked dash and the coffee stain on the passenger floor was gone. Retired. Sold for scrap on a rainy afternoon in August. In its place sat this glossy black Ford SUV, freshly repainted, chrome polished, until it threw back the fluorescent lights of the garage like a mirror. It was supposed to be a gift. The county had cut a deal at an auction 2 states away, and Sheriff Odessa Halbrook herself had signed the purchase order, proud of the money she had saved the taxpayers of Millbrook. Ridge did not care about taxpayer money. Ridge cared about the smell. Callum knelt lower, water soaking through the knees of his uniform pants until it bit at his skin, and he looked into the dog's amber eyes. He had seen that look only twice before in his life. Once, 3 summers ago, when they had cornered a burglar in an attic on Mulberry Street who was hiding a folding knife against his forearm. And once, in the middle of last February, when Ridge had refused to walk into a farmhouse basement 2 whole minutes before the propane tank inside blew the windows out into the yard. Both times, the dog had known something Callum did not. Both times, he had saved a life. Callum was not about to make the mistake of ignoring him now. He stood up. He wiped his hands on his jacket. Then he walked back into the sheriff's office to say something he had never in his career expected to say. "I need to pull the new SUV out of service." Sheriff Odessa Halbrook was 58 years old, silver-haired, and had a way of raising one silver eyebrow that made grown deputies apologize before they had even finished their sentence. She raised it now. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. "Callum, it has been in the fleet for 6 hours. 6. Ridge will not ride in it. Ridge will not ride in it." She repeated the words slowly, as if she needed to hear how they sounded out loud. "Deputy, maybe the dog is having a bad morning. Maybe he does not like the new smell. Take him out for a walk, feed him a treat. Try again in an hour." "Sheriff, with respect, I'm not asking to skip a shift. I'm asking for permission to take that vehicle to the impound bay and go over it inch by inch. All morning if I need to." She studied him. Odessa Halbrook had not become sheriff of Millbrook County by ignoring her people, and she had known Callum Rutherford since the day he walked out of the academy with his boots too shiny and his uniform still smelling of the tailor's chalk. She had watched him marry Marissa Cavett the summer after he pinned his badge on. She had watched Marissa carry Millie in her arms out of Millbrook Memorial 10 years ago on a July morning so hot the asphalt stuck to shoe soles. And she had watched Callum bury Marissa 2 years back after the accident on Route 9, when a hay truck lost its load into a curve and Marissa's little sedan had been beneath it. Odessa had watched him climb back into his uniform 3 weeks after the funeral because staying home would have finished him. She trusted his judgment. She trusted his dog even more. "Take it," she said, "but if I do not hear from you by lunch, I am calling you." He nodded. He walked back through the corridor and out into the garage, where Ridge was still exactly where he had left him, water dripping off his coat, ears down but eyes alert. Callum unclipped the leash from the SUV door and clipped it instead to his own belt. "All right," he said. "You do not have to get in. We are going to figure this out together." Ridge exhaled a breath that seemed to come from the pit of his belly. It was the closest a dog could come to saying thank you. The impound bay was on the far side of the lot, past the fuel pumps and the old wooden equipment shed. Callum drove the SUV over there himself, alone, at 10 miles an hour with the wipers going. He backed it into the empty bay, killed the engine, and slid out. Ridge stayed at the doorway of the bay, 40 feet away, watching. He would not step past the threshold. He whined, low and continuous, whenever Callum lifted the rear hatch. Callum went at the vehicle the way he had been taught, back when he served 2 years on the State Narcotics Task Force before his transfer home to Millbrook. He pulled every floor mat. He unscrewed every trim panel he could unscrew with the multi-tool on his belt. He ran his hands along every seam he could reach. He shone the small flashlight from his shirt pocket into every crevice and shadow. He tapped the floor of the cargo bay with the butt of his flashlight, listening for the difference between a solid ring and a hollow thud. He tapped the door panels. He tapped the wheel wells. He tapped the underside of the dashboard where the wiring harness bundled up behind the fuse box. Nothing rang wrong. He was almost ready to admit defeat when he pulled the last section of cargo liner back for a second look and heard it. A dull thump. Just once. Beneath the raised lip where the spare tire sat. He froze. He tapped again. The same dull thump. He tapped the panel to the left of it. Solid. He tapped the panel to the right. Solid. Only that one square, no larger than a paperback book, sounded wrong. He peeled the liner all the way back, careful not to tear the vinyl. Underneath sat a rectangle of stamped steel that had been cut, replaced, and sealed over with a thin bead of adhesive so fresh Callum could still smell the acetone in it. He fetched a pry bar from the tool wall. He worked the tip under the edge and lifted, slow, until the seal cracked with a small dry pop. Underneath sat 2 small canvas bundles, vacuum-wrapped in clear plastic, each about the size of a paperback book. They gave off almost no smell to a human nose. Almost. Callum knelt and lifted one, and then he set it back down exactly where it had been, and he did not open the plastic. He knew what he was looking at. 10 years as a deputy and 2 years on the state task force had taught him what small, dense bundles of powder looked like when they were tucked in places that no honest man ever needed a hiding place. He photographed everything with his phone. He photographed the seam, the fresh adhesive, the underside of the liner, the bundles from 3 angles. He locked the bay. He walked back to the doorway. And then he did what he had wanted to do for the last hour and 40 minutes. He sat down on the cold, wet concrete next to his dog, put an arm around Ridge's shoulders, and pressed his forehead against the damp fur behind Ridge's ear. "You did good," he whispered. "You did so good. I'm so sorry I doubted you for even 1 second. Ridge leaned back against him. He was still trembling, but not as hard now. Callum stayed there for a full minute before he pulled out his radio and asked the sheriff to come to the impound bay. By the time Odessa got there, Ridge had stopped shaking, but Callum had not. The state lab in Frankfurt ran the analysis within 18 hours, which was faster than usual because the sample lit their meters up. 2 small bundles, enough fentanyl cut and pressed to street strength to kill roughly half the town of Millbrook, which had a population of just under 7,000 souls. Enough to end every child at Millbrook Elementary twice over. Enough to hollow out 3 counties and leave the funeral homes booked into next spring. Odessa sat across from Callum in her office the next morning. The rain had stopped in the night, and the sun was coming through the blinds in flat gold bars. Neither of them was touching their coffee. The report sat on the desk between them like something poisonous. "Where did this SUV come from?" she asked, though she already knew. "Ohio, county auction up near Toledo. All the paperwork's clean. Refurbishment done by a shop called Riverbend Fleet Solutions. Owner of record. One Dwight Kessler, age 47, runs the outfit for 11 years. No prior arrests, not even a speeding ticket. Not a speeding ticket. Odessa turned the report over in her hands as if it might read differently on the back. So a spotless fleet manager in Toledo, Ohio, is packing government auction vehicles with pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl. And until yesterday morning, no one on either side of the Ohio River had the first idea. No one except Ridge. No one except Ridge. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had gone quieter, harder. Callum, listen. If Riverbend Fleet Solutions has been doing this for any length of time, we are not looking at one bad shipment. We are looking at years. And that means there are already bundles out there that we did not catch, in vehicles that were sold on, in vehicles other departments bought. Ambulances maybe, school board vans, anything that comes out of a fleet auction, anything. Callum felt the cold slide down his spine and settle in his stomach. Where do we even start? Quietly, she said. Very, very quietly, because whoever put those bundles into that SUV expected them to reach somebody, and the moment that somebody realizes they did not, this whole thing gets dangerous. He nodded. He looked out the window at the parking lot, where Ridge sat inside his own personal vehicle, waiting, watching, ears pricked at every stranger who walked past. Callum did not know it yet, but somewhere across the state line, a phone was ringing, and the man who answered it was already reaching for his own gun. For the next 48 hours, Callum did not sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch. He worked out of a locked corner office at the sheriff's station, the door taped shut with a strip of masking paper along the hinge so he would know if anyone had opened it while he was gone. Sheriff Halbrook joined him there before dawn each morning with a thermos of coffee she had brewed at home, because the office part was where too many people passed through. Together, they mapped out every vehicle Riverbend Fleet Solutions had refurbished in the past 4 years that they could trace. It was a longer list than either of them wanted. 72 vehicles, sold to 29 different agencies across 5 states. Some had already been resold to private buyers. Some had already been scrapped. Some were sitting in police motor pools right that very moment, being driven to school pickups and grocery runs and traffic stops, with God only knew what tucked beneath their cargo floors. They could not simply call every agency. If word got out to a talker, the buyers of the fentanyl would vanish. If word got out to the wrong deputy or the wrong dispatcher, someone would start pulling bundles and burning them, and the trail would go cold before they could follow it. So they moved carefully. Sheriff Halbrook picked up the phone and called 3 people she trusted absolutely and without qualification. A state police captain in Frankfurt named Delvin, who had ridden with her the summer she was a rookie and still owed her a favor from 20 years back. A federal agent named Rosalind Vance, who had worked a kidnapping case with her 15 years ago and had been calling her every Christmas since. And Prudence Ellsworth, the district attorney of Millbrook County, a 50-year-old woman who had never once lost a case that mattered and who could keep a secret longer than any human being Odessa had ever met. By the end of the second night, they had a plan. Ridge would be the tool. Ridge and any other narcotics dog they could pull from surrounding counties would sweep every accessible Riverbend vehicle under the cover of routine safety inspections, one department at a time, in quiet, coordinated waves. Nothing would be public. Nothing would be logged in a way that a corrupt clerk could see. And nobody, absolutely nobody, would tell Dwight Kessler that anyone was looking. The plan was solid. The plan lasted exactly 6 days. On the 6th day, at 4:14 in the afternoon, a black pickup truck pulled up to the fence outside Millbrook Elementary and idled there for 11 full minutes. It did not have plates. Its windows were tinted so dark that even the crossing guard, a retired postal worker named Wilma Torrance, could not see who was inside. When the last bell rang and the children came pouring out of the front doors in a laughing, yelling flood, the truck did not move. Wilma noted it. Wilma did what Wilma had done for 26 years of hall duty across 2 different generations of Millbrook children. She wrote down the model of the vehicle, the time, and the direction it eventually drove off in when the last kindergartner had been walked to the last waiting car. That last kindergartner was not who Wilma was watching. Wilma was watching a 4th grader named Millie Rutherford. The truck did not drive off until Millie was safely inside her Aunt Colleen's little green station wagon, buckled into the back seat, laughing at something her cousin Jackson had said. Then, slowly, the truck rolled away west on Chestnut Avenue and disappeared around the corner by the Baptist church. Wilma called the sheriff's office that night, apologetic about taking up their time. She said she was probably being an old busybody. Sheriff Halbrook was in the office when the call came in, working late again. She listened to Wilma. She thanked her twice and hung up. Then she sat with both hands flat on the desk for a full minute before she picked up the phone again and called Callum at home. "Get Millie packed," she said. "Tonight. You are going to your sister-in-law's place in Bowling Green. I am sending Owen and Marcus with you, and do not tell anyone else in this office where you are going. Not one soul. Not the dispatcher, not Prudence, not me." Callum did not ask why. He knew why. He had known why since the moment he had unwrapped the plastic on that second canvas bundle and understood the size of what Ridge had found. He was upstairs putting Millie's pajamas into a duffel bag when she padded into the doorway, her stuffed rabbit under one arm, her hair still damp from her bath. She was 10 years old and had her mother's dark, serious eyes, and she never missed anything, ever. "Daddy, are we going somewhere?" "Just for a little while, sweet pea. Just a visit to Aunt Colleen and Uncle Denny." "On a school night?" "Yeah, on a school night." She studied him for a long moment, the way her mother used to study him when he was pretending not to be worried. Then she came into the room, put her small, warm hand on top of his, and said in a very quiet voice, "It is the SUV, isn't it? The thing Ridge found." He froze with a folded pair of leggings still in his hand. "How do you—" "I heard you on the phone with the sheriff last night. You said the word fentanyl. I know what that is. Grandma had a friend who died of that. She told me." Callum sat down on the edge of the bed. For a moment, he could not speak. Then he pulled his daughter close and pressed his lips against the top of her head, and he said, very quietly, "You are too smart for your own good. You know that. Mommy always said so." Mommy was right. Downstairs, Ridge stood at the front door, ears up, watching the street through the sidelight window. Every headlight that passed, he tracked. Every footstep on the sidewalk outside, he registered. When Owen Callahan and Marcus Hollis pulled up in Marcus's personal truck 20 minutes later, Ridge growled at the door for the first 2 seconds before recognizing them and easing. Callum noted that in the back of his mind. Ridge trusted Owen. Ridge trusted Marcus. But Ridge trusted no one automatically anymore, and that was information worth keeping. The drive to Bowling Green took 2 hours and 17 minutes on the empty rural highway. Millie fell asleep against Ridge in the back seat, her cheek pressed into his shoulder, one small hand tangled in the fur along his chest. Owen drove because he was the only one of them who had gone the full night without coffee and would not get jittery. Marcus rode in the passenger seat with one hand on the door handle the entire way. Every few minutes, he checked the side mirror. Every few minutes he asked Callum, quietly, if any headlights had been behind them for too long. The answer was always no. That did not stop him from asking. They arrived at Colleen and Denny's little brick ranch just after midnight. Colleen was Marissa's older sister, and she had 2 boys of her own, one Millie's age and one 2 years older. She hugged Callum tight at the front door and did not ask a single question. Denny stood behind her in his bathrobe with a mug of tea and a face full of quiet concern. Millie was carried in and tucked into a spare bedroom before she fully woke up. Ridge did not want to leave. Callum knelt on the porch, cupped the dog's face in both hands, and said very seriously, "I need you to stay here. I need you to guard her. Do you understand me?" Ridge understood him. Belgian Malinois always understand more than people give them credit for. He turned without another sound and walked straight to the door of Millie's room, where he lay down across the threshold and put his chin on his paws. That was where he stayed. Callum, Owen and Marcus drove back to Millbrook in silence. The road unwound in front of them, in a long, dark tunnel of trees. Somewhere near the county line, Marcus rolled down his window and spat out into the wind. Owen glanced at him, but did not say anything. Callum, in the back seat now, watched the two of them and felt the first small, cold thing turn over in his chest. He did not know why. He did not name it. He filed it and let it lie. The next morning, at 7:43, Sheriff Halbrook received an anonymous tip through the county switchboard. A voice, male, calm, unhurried, and unaccented in any way she could pin down, said only one sentence before he hung up. "Tell your deputy the dog cannot sleep across every doorway forever." Odessa listened to the recording 3 times. Then she stood up, walked into the bullpen, and locked eyes with every single deputy on shift. She did not say a word. She did not have to. Every one of them knew that whoever had made that call knew things about the Rutherford family that no outsider should know. Knew Ridge was gone from Millbrook. Knew, therefore, where he had been sent. Knew, therefore, that the leak was inside the building. That was the moment Odessa Halbrook understood something she had been trying not to understand for a week. The fentanyl in that SUV had not been meant to travel on to some distant destination. Somebody local was supposed to pull those bundles out of the vehicle before it was ever assigned to patrol, and that somebody was still walking around wearing a badge or working behind a desk in her own office. Odessa did not tell Callum right away. She could not. Not until she had a shorter list of suspects. Instead, she called him into her office an hour later, closed the door, and said only that the tip line had lit up with a threat and that Millie needed to stay in Bowling Green for at least another week. Callum accepted this without argument. Then she asked him to bring Ridge back that afternoon, because she needed the dog, and because, more than that, she needed Callum near her where she could see him. That evening, Callum drove back to Bowling Green, brought Ridge home, and left Millie under the roof of 2 aunts, 2 uncles, 3 cousins, and Marcus's own cousin, who was a state trooper on leave in the neighborhood. Colleen promised she would not let Millie out of her sight. Denny cleaned his hunting shotgun on the kitchen table in front of Callum as a promise. Ridge did not want to leave Millie. He rode in the passenger seat on the drive home, with his head turned all the way around, watching the road behind them, refusing to sleep, refusing to even close his eyes for longer than a blink. When they pulled into the sheriff's parking lot at 11 that night, Ridge suddenly went rigid in the seat beside Callum. His hackles came up in a stiff line from his shoulders to his tail. He fixed his eyes on the far corner of the lot, where a battered white sedan was parked under a broken streetlight. Callum saw nothing. There was no person in view, but Ridge growled, low and continuous, the same tone he had made at the SUV. Callum called it in. 2 other deputies came out with their flashlights up. The sedan was empty. Its doors were unlocked. Inside the glove compartment, folded and sealed, sat a plain manila envelope. Inside the envelope was a single photograph, printed on ordinary printer paper, of Millie walking out of Bowling Green Elementary that very afternoon. The photograph had been taken from a distance, through a chain-link fence, but Millie's face was perfectly clear. She was smiling. Ridge, in the frame beside her, was showing his teeth. The photograph had been taken less than 8 hours after Millie had arrived at Colleen's house. Less than 4 hours after Odessa had first gotten the threat call. It had been developed and printed on the ancient copy machine that sat behind the sheriff's dispatch desk. Odessa knew the moment she saw it, because the top edge of the paper had the faint diagonal streak that only the Millbrook copier left, from a scanner drum that had been failing for 2 years and was on the maintenance list to be replaced. She had seen that streak on every case file, every incident report, every duty roster in the building for 2 full years. The leak was not just inside the building. The leak was inside the office. The leak had access to the copier. The leak had access to the tip logs. The leak had access to the roster of who had gone where and when. Sheriff Holbrook spent the next 36 hours doing something she had never done in 22 years of policing. She lied to her own deputies. She fed slightly different pieces of information to each of them, small planted crumbs, and then she waited to see which crumbs showed up in the next threat or the next quiet act of interference. It was slow, it was awful, and it worked. By Friday morning, she had narrowed the leak down to 3 people. Deputy Owen Callahan, 34, single, 6 years on the force, the son of the county coroner. Deputy Marcus Hollis, 41, married with 2 teenage boys, 2 years on the force after transferring in from a suburban Louisville department. And Dispatcher Ramona Peel, 51, widowed, 17 years behind the switchboard, who had brought a homemade coffee cake into the office every Monday morning for as long as anyone could remember. She hated the list. She had known Ramona since Ramona's children were in diapers. She had gone to Owen's little brother's wedding last spring and cried when the vows were read. And Marcus, quiet, steady Marcus, had been the one who insisted on riding with Callum the night they took Millie to Bowling Green. Any one of them would have been unthinkable 10 days ago. Somebody had to be thought about anyway. That night, without telling anyone, Odessa did something else that was new. She drove out to a small storage unit in Elizabethtown, opened a locked steel box she had not touched in 11 years, and pulled out a personal cell phone and a burner SIM card. She dialed a number she still remembered by heart. When Rosalind Vance picked up on the second ring, Odessa said quietly, "Ros, I need your help. It is bad, and I cannot trust my own house." Rosalind Vance was a federal agent based out of Louisville. She had known Odessa Holbrook for 15 years. She said only, "I will be there tomorrow." And she was. The next morning at 6 a.m., a woman in a plain grey suit walked into the Millbrook Sheriff's office carrying a paper coffee cup and a leather briefcase. Odessa introduced her to the shift as a training auditor from the state, come down to observe procedures. Everyone shook her hand politely. Everyone smiled. Nobody, not one deputy, saw the small federal badge tucked inside the interior pocket of her jacket. By the end of that afternoon, Rosalind had a wire on Odessa's own coffee mug and a discreet miniature camera aimed at the copy machine behind the dispatch desk, mounted in an air vent so ordinary that 15 deputies walked past it that first day and not one of them looked up. Meanwhile, Callum was chasing the vehicles. With the help of Rosalind's team, working out of a rented conference room in a Louisville business park, he had begun coordinating quiet sweeps of every Riverbend vehicle they could find without alerting the network. In 4 days, 17 vehicles had been searched. 9 had turned up bundles. Ridge and 3 other dogs, 1 from Bowling Green and 2 from Frankfurt, had made every single hit. The volume of what they were pulling out of hidden compartments was staggering. If those 9 bundles had reached their intended pickup points and been cut and sold on the street, the death toll would have been in the thousands. Not hundreds, thousands. But it was the 10th bundle that changed everything. The 10th bundle was found not in a police cruiser or an ambulance or a school board van, but in a used pickup truck that had been auctioned off to a private buyer in Bowling Green 3 months earlier. The buyer was a man named Barrett Vaughn, a mechanic in his mid-40s who had paid cash and driven the truck home the same afternoon. When Rosalind's team pulled Vaughn's records, they discovered something interesting and then, on a second look, something alarming. Barrett Vaughn had bought 7 vehicles at Riverbend auctions in the past 2 years. 7. All of them resold within weeks to buyers whose names never appeared in the paperwork. All of them, presumably, gutted for their hidden cargo before being passed along to whoever came next. Barrett Vaughan was not just a Riverbend customer. Barrett Vaughan was the local distributor, and Barrett Vaughan lived 12 minutes from Callum's front door. They put a tail on Vaughan immediately, a rotating team of Rosalind's federal people in unmarked cars. For 3 straight days, he did absolutely nothing suspicious. He drove to his shop at 8, ate his lunch at the same diner every day at 12:15, drove home at 6, ate dinner in front of his television, and was in bed by 10. He did not use his phone for anything except calling his wife and ordering a pizza on Wednesday night. He did not meet with anyone. He did not touch a single vehicle he had not been paid to repair. It was almost too clean. Then, on the 4th day, at 8:17 in the evening, Barrett Vaughan walked out of his back door, got into a maroon Chevy sedan that he had never once driven before, and rolled quietly out of his driveway with his headlights off for the first 2 blocks. He drove 26 miles east into a stretch of pine woods along the Green River. The federal team followed at a careful distance, using night vision. When Vaughan's Chevy turned off the paved highway and rolled down a rutted dirt track into the trees, they held back. When Vaughan stopped in front of an abandoned tobacco barn and killed his lights, they held back. When a second vehicle rolled in from a different direction about 6 minutes later, they held back. They had one shot at this raid, and they needed the meeting to actually happen before they moved on it. Ridge whined once, low, in the back of the SUV where he was riding with Callum. Callum stroked his ears and whispered, "Not yet, buddy, not yet." Through the binoculars, Callum watched 2 men climb out of the second vehicle. The first was a stranger in a long, dark coat. The second was a bald man in his late 40s, wearing a plain dress shirt tucked into denim pants. Callum recognized him instantly from the DMV photograph the Ohio State Police had pulled. Older than the picture, bolder now, same close-set eyes and same thin line of a mouth. Dwight Kessler had come south to see the operation for himself. The 3 men stood by the barn for a full minute before Vaughan unlocked the padlock on the sliding door and led them inside. A single dim light came on through the barn's cracked wood siding. Rosalind whispered into her radio, "Now, now, go." They moved fast. 4 teams, 16 agents, 2 K9 units, Ridge included. They cleared the perimeter in under a minute, moving through the pines with practiced silence. Rosalind and 2 agents kicked the barn door open in a single coordinated motion. The barn was empty, except for a wooden table in the middle of the dirt floor, and on the table 3 neat stacks of vacuum-sealed bundles like the ones Ridge had found in the SUV, and standing beside the table, 3 men with their hands raised in the air above their heads. No weapons in sight, no attempt to run, no expression of surprise on any of their faces. Dwight Kessler was smiling faintly, as if he had been expecting this exact moment, which of course he had. Because Dwight Kessler had known they were coming, because someone had told him. The trap sprang shut a moment later. From 3 directions at once, the woods around the barn lit up with muzzle flashes and the flat cracks of rifle fire. Somebody had positioned shooters in the trees, waiting for the raid to happen. It was not a police operation walking into an ambush by accident. It was an ambush that had been designed and rehearsed, with the shooters already in place hours before Vaughan ever left his house. Someone had told them exactly where and exactly when. Callum threw himself flat against the fender of the nearest cruiser. Ridge dropped beside him without being told, low to the ground, ears back, eyes wide. Rosalind shouted something sharp and short into her radio. An agent to Callum's left cried out, hit somewhere in the shoulder, and rolled behind a tire. Bullets punched into metal above their heads with sounds like heavy hammer strikes. The bright white lights of the barn interior had blinded everyone for the first crucial seconds after they burst in. And now, out here, they could not see where the shots were coming from through the black woods. Ridge could. The dog rose to a crouch, muzzle pointed toward a patch of pines about 40 yards to the east. He gave one short, sharp bark. Callum, who had spent 3 years learning to read every single sound his dog made, understood that bark Exactly. One shooter. That direction. Close. He shouted the direction to Rosalind. Two agents pivoted and returned fire in a controlled 3-round burst. There was a grunt in the dark, a crashing of branches, and then silence from that direction. Ridge turned his muzzle. Another sharp bark, north-northeast this time. Another direction called out, another pivot, another silence. Ridge did it 3 more times over the next 45 seconds. Each time, the location he pointed to went quiet after a controlled burst of return fire. Whoever had planned this ambush had not planned for the possibility that a single well-trained Belgian Malinois could locate targets in near-total darkness by sound and smell and the tiny movements of leaves. In under 90 seconds, the woods went completely quiet. 6 shooters, all down or fled. When the agents finally advanced into the trees to sweep, they found a single wounded man alive, a rifle knocked out of his hands, curled behind a fallen log with a bullet in his thigh, and both hands pressed to the wound. He looked up at them with wide, startled eyes. He said, in a shaking voice, "The dog. The dog was supposed to be dead. He said the dog would be dead." Callum knelt down beside him. Ridge stood over the man, teeth bared, silent. Callum said very softly, "Who said the dog would be dead?" The wounded shooter, whose leg was bleeding badly, and who was clearly not a professional, but a hired local with a bad debt of his own, told them without hesitation. He wanted to live. He was already crying. The name he gave was a name Callum knew. The name he gave was Marcus Hollis. Callum did not react in the way a lesser man might have. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply stood up, walked back to the barn, and radioed Sheriff Halbrook. When she picked up, he said only, "It is Marcus. Confirmed. He set us up. He said the dog would be dead tonight." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Odessa said, "Where is he right now?" "Off shift. He was supposed to be at home tonight with his family. His truck is not at his house. I have had eyes on his address for the last 6 hours. He left an hour and 20 minutes ago and did not tell his wife where he was going." "He is coming here to the barn?" "No, Callum." Her voice went flat and cold. "He is not coming there. He does not need to. His job was to make sure you never came back from this raid. He is going somewhere else instead. Think, if you were him and you knew this raid was blown and you needed a card that would still keep you alive tomorrow, where would you go?" Callum's stomach turned to ice water. "Bowling Green." "Callum, go now. I am calling Warren County State Police. Rosalind will send federal agents. Do not wait." He did not remember the drive. He did not remember getting into the SUV or turning it around on the muddy dirt track or the 87 miles of dark 2-lane road he covered in 51 minutes with the lights spinning silently on top and no siren on because a siren would have warned Marcus. He remembered only that Ridge lay in the passenger seat the entire way with his eyes fixed on the horizon ahead, and that Ridge did not move a single muscle for the entire drive, not even to lick his nose. Colleen and Denny's house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac lined with maple trees whose leaves had gone yellow with October. It was 1:32 in the morning when Callum killed his headlights half a block away and coasted the last 100 yards on the engine idle. He saw immediately what he had prayed he would not see: Marcus's dark blue pickup truck, parked on the street, 2 houses down from Colleen's, angled so that the driver could get in fast and pull away. No lights on inside Colleen's house. That did not mean anything. Marcus was smart. Marcus would not have kicked the front door in. Marcus would have picked the back door lock, the way he himself had taught the rookies to pick their own back doors during a training class 2 summers back, and slipped inside silent. Marcus knew the layout too. He had helped Colleen and Denny move furniture the weekend they hosted a family cookout in the spring. He knew exactly which door led to the guest bedroom where Millie was sleeping. Callum got out. Ridge got out. Callum drew his sidearm from its holster and thumbed the safety off with a small click that seemed to echo in the still, cold air. Ridge, without a signal from Callum, dropped into low scent mode, muzzle down, weight distributed silently across all 4 pads. They circled the house from the north, moving through the wet grass in a slow crouch. The back door was open a crack, just an inch. The tape on the alarm sensor above the doorframe had been cut cleanly with a small pair of side snips. Ridge tensed. Callum whispered a single word so quietly that only a dog with a Belgian Malinois ears could have heard it. Slow. They went in. The kitchen was empty and dark, only the digital clock on the microwave glowing green. 2:28, it said. The living room was empty. Colleen and Denny slept in the master bedroom on the ground floor at the front of the house, and their door was still closed. The boys slept in the room next to theirs. The stairs to the second floor, where the guest bedroom sat at the end of the hall, were carpeted. Callum tested the first step with his weight. It did not creak. Neither did the second step. Neither did the third. He was halfway up when Ridge, 3 steps ahead of him, went absolutely rigid. At the top of the stairs, in the hallway, stood a shadow. Broad shoulders, familiar posture, standing very still and listening. In the shadow's right hand, a pistol with a black cylindrical suppressor screwed onto the muzzle. And to the shadow's left, 5 feet away, the door to Millie's room, still cracked open exactly the way Callum had left it 3 days ago. Marcus Hollis heard nothing. Ridge did not growl. Ridge did not bark. Ridge did what he had been trained for years to do, silently, without any warning, in one single fluid explosion up the last 5 stairs. Ridge hit Marcus at the waist in a low tackle. The pistol fired once, straight up into the ceiling, and a small shower of plaster dust drifted down over both of them. Marcus went backward against the wall, with the wind driven out of him, and 85 pounds of dog muscle and locked jaw clamped down on his gun arm, just above the wrist. Callum came up the last stairs in 3 strides. He kicked the pistol away down the hall. He drove his knee into Marcus's sternum before Marcus could think about a second weapon that might have been in his waistband. Marcus made a small, choked sound. His eyes rolled up briefly and came back down and focused on Callum's face and did not know where to look. Downstairs, Denny appeared in the hallway in his bathrobe with the hunting shotgun already up to his shoulder. Colleen appeared a second later with the house phone already dialing 911. And down the hall past Marcus, the door to Millie's room opened wider. Millie stood there in her long white nightgown, her stuffed rabbit hanging from one hand, her dark hair mussed from sleep. She saw her father. She did not scream. She only looked at him and asked in a very small voice, "Daddy?" "I am here, sweet pea," Callum said, and he did not take his eyes off Marcus. "You are okay. Go to Aunt Colleen. Ridge and I have got this. It is going to be all right." Millie went. She walked down the hall past Marcus without looking at him, one hand trailing along the wall for balance, and she went down the stairs to Colleen, and Colleen wrapped her up in a robe and held her tight against her chest and rocked her back and forth without saying a single word. Ridge did not release Marcus's arm until Callum said, low and clear, "Ridge, out." Ridge released. Marcus cradled the arm against his chest, wincing. The Warren County State Police pulled up 11 minutes later with lights on, but sirens off, out of respect for the neighborhood. Rosalind's federal team pulled up 15 minutes after that. Marcus Hollis was cuffed, read his rights, and sat on the curb outside Colleen and Denny's house at 2:17 in the morning under the yellow porch light of the neighbor across the street. He did not fight. He did not try to run. He only stared at his own hands for a long time, and then, when Callum walked past him toward the ambulance, where a paramedic was checking Ridge for bite injuries and finding none, Marcus said one thing. "They had my boys, 3 years back. Debts from a bad summer I had. Gambling, cards, sports, everything. I got in too deep with people I never should have talked to. They bought the debt. They said all I had to do was help move some vehicles through the auction. I thought if I did what they asked and did it quiet, nobody would ever get hurt. I never thought, "Save it," Callum said without turning around. "You aimed a gun at my daughter's door." Marcus started to say something else and stopped and looked back down at his hands. Callum kept walking. He did not turn back around, not once, not even when Marcus called after him. By dawn, the whole story was clear. Marcus Hollis had accumulated crushing gambling debts in the year before he transferred to Millbrook from his old department in Louisville. Dwight Kessler's people had bought those debts through a series of shell companies. In exchange for forgiveness of what he owed and for his boy's safety, Marcus had done exactly one job. He had made sure that the vehicles bought by Millbrook County at Riverbend auctions and the vehicles bought by 2 neighboring counties ended up in impound bays where he could quietly extract the hidden bundles during off-shift hours before the vehicles were assigned to patrol. It was a good plan. It had worked once silently 6 months earlier with a different SUV. It had failed the second time only because Ridge had refused to get inside the vehicle in the first place, and had forced the whole hidden compartment to be found in daylight with the sheriff standing 3 feet away. Marcus had not counted on a dog. Marcus had never counted on Ridge. None of them ever did. Dwight Kessler was in federal custody by breakfast. The barn had yielded almost 40 pounds of pressed fentanyl in the stacks on the table, and another 20 pounds hidden inside a false wall behind the loft ladder. The wounded shooter and 2 others, captured that night at the tree line, had rolled on the entire distribution chain within 12 hours in exchange for reduced charges. Barrett Vaughn was going to prison for the rest of his natural life. Riverbend Fleet Solutions was shuttered by federal marshals that same morning, its records seized, its computers imaged, its remaining unauctioned inventory of vehicles being tracked down across 7 states over the following 2 weeks. 6 other men who had worked with Kessler were arrested by that Friday. By the end of the month, the number was 14. By the end of the year, it would be 29. Callum drove Millie home to Millbrook that afternoon in his own personal truck, with Ridge riding between them on the bench seat, one paw resting on Millie's knee, his head against her shoulder. Millie did not talk much. She held Ridge's paw with both of her hands. She looked out the window at the fields going brown for autumn. At one point she said, without turning her head toward her father, "Ridge saved my life, didn't he?" "Yeah, sweet pea. He did. He saved a lot of lives, didn't he? A lot of them. Is he tired?" Callum looked at the dog. Ridge was watching the road ahead with steady, patient amber eyes, ears half up, still ready. "He is tired," Callum said, "but he is not going to show it. Not until you are safe inside our house. And then he is going to sleep for a whole day." Millie was quiet again for a mile or so. Then she said, in the small, serious voice that was so much like her mother's, "Daddy, can we make him a medal?" Callum smiled for the first time in 9 days. "I think we can do a little better than that, sweet pea." 6 months went by. The Riverbend case wound its way through federal and state courts in 3 different states. Dwight Kessler was sentenced to 42 years in federal prison and would die there. Marcus Hollis pled guilty in exchange for testifying against the network above him and got 17 years, which meant he would be released as a very old man and would never wear a badge again. Barrett Vaughn got life. Sheriff Holbrook, at 59, filed for 1 more term as sheriff of Millbrook County and won her election in a landslide the following November, with a margin of almost 73%. Rosalind Vance was awarded a federal commendation and sent Odessa a card at Christmas, with only 3 words handwritten inside. "Told you so." Deputy Callum Rutherford was promoted to sergeant with a small ceremony in the sheriff's office attended by only Odessa, Prudence, Owen Callahan, and Ramona Peel, all of whom had been cleared of any suspicion and had cried tears of relief when the mole was named. Ridge stayed exactly the same. Ridge did not care about titles or promotions or commendations. Ridge cared about Callum, about Millie, about dinner at 6 o'clock, and about the smell of anything that did not belong. Every morning, without being told, he still put his nose along the seam of every police vehicle he passed in the parking lot. Every night, he still slept across the doorway of Millie's bedroom, chin on his paws, one ear turned toward the hallway. And every once in a while, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, Callum would look down from paperwork and find Ridge staring up at him with a steady, patient look that seemed to ask, "You still trust me, right?" Callum always crouched down and put both hands on the dog's face and answered the same way in the same tone. "I trust you more than anything on this earth." The county fair opened on a warm October Saturday. The whole town came out for it, the way the whole town of Millbrook came out for everything. There were pumpkin pies lined up on folding tables under an awning at the front gate. There were pig races behind the livestock barn. There was a Ferris wheel with peeling white paint and a carney working the lever who had been running that same Ferris wheel every October for 31 years. The sun came through the yellow maple leaves overhead in bright dappled patches. Children ran everywhere with cotton candy stuck to their fingers. Old men sat on hay bales along the fence and talked about the harvest. At 2 in the afternoon, the mayor of Millbrook, a soft-spoken man named Everett Gaines, who had held the office for 14 years, climbed onto a small wooden stage in the middle of the fairground and asked everyone gathered to please turn their attention to a very special ceremony. The crowd quieted. People set down their paper plates. Parents lifted small children onto their shoulders so they could see. Sheriff Halbrook joined the mayor on the stage in her dress uniform, silver braid gleaming. Callum followed her up in his own dress uniform, with the new sergeant's chevron stitched to his sleeves. And behind them came a small girl in a blue dress with her mother's dark, serious eyes. Her hair braided down her back in 2 neat plaits, carrying a small blue velvet cushion in both hands. And behind her, walking exactly at heel, ears up, coat brushed to a shine, tail held level and steady, came a Belgian Malinois named Ridge. The mayor cleared his throat and read out a proclamation from a folded piece of parchment. He read about the fentanyl and the vehicles and the lives that would have been lost. He read about a rainy Tuesday morning in a county garage and about the courage of a deputy who had trusted his partner instead of forcing him. He read about the town of Millbrook itself and about how a single act of stubbornness on a wet floor had saved perhaps thousands of people up and down the Ohio and Kentucky valleys, most of whom would never, for the rest of their lives, know that they had been saved. He read for almost 4 minutes without stopping. When he finished, he folded the parchment, slipped it back into his jacket pocket, and asked Millie Rutherford to please come forward. Millie walked to the front of the stage. Ridge sat perfectly still beside her, waiting. Millie knelt down on the wooden planks in front of him, and Ridge lowered his head slightly so she could work. She lifted the brass medal off the blue velvet cushion. The medal was small and round, engraved on the front with the shape of a dog's head in profile, and on the back with the words, "Faithful, True, and Stubborn." Millie looped the blue ribbon over Ridge's neck. She pinned the medal, very carefully, to the working collar he wore. Her small fingers worked the pin closed with the same seriousness her mother had once used to sew a button back onto Callum's shirt on their kitchen table. When she was done, Millie leaned forward and whispered something into the dog's ear that only he could hear. Ridge licked her cheek once. The crowd, which had been trying to stay respectful and quiet for the whole ceremony, gave up all at once and burst into a long, loud, thundering standing ovation. Somebody in the back put 2 fingers into their mouth and whistled. A woman near the front started crying. Children clapped as hard as their small hands could clap. Callum stood beside Sheriff Halbrook with his hat over his heart, and he clapped until his palms stung. Odessa leaned toward him and said quietly, so only he could hear over the noise, "In 22 years of this job, Callum, I have never seen a dog save so many lives with one single act of stubbornness." Callum smiled. You already told me that, Sheriff. Back in the impound bay. I know. I'm telling you again, and I will tell you a third time on your retirement day, so you had better remember it. That night, after the fair had emptied out and the string lights along the midway had been packed away and the pig race pens had been hosed down for the season, Callum drove home in his personal truck with Millie asleep against his shoulder and Ridge curled on the floor of the cab at their feet, the medal still on his collar, catching the passing streetlights. When Callum pulled into the driveway of the little pale yellow house he had shared with Marissa and now shared with only his daughter and his dog, he sat for a long moment in the dark with the engine off before he made a move to get out. He thought about that rainy Tuesday morning. He thought about the sound the water had made on the steel roof of the garage like 1,000 marbles falling from the sky. He thought about Ridge planting his paws on the wet concrete and refusing, for the first and only time in his life, to obey a command he had obeyed 1,000 times before. He thought about how easy it would have been to shout at the dog, to pull the leash harder, to force him. He thought about how many men, better men than him even, would have done exactly that, out of impatience or embarrassment in front of the sheriff. He thought about how many lives, including his daughter's, were still walking around in this world because he had chosen instead to kneel down on the cold, wet concrete and listen. And he made himself a small, quiet promise, sitting there in the dark truck with his little family asleep around him and the porch light of the house glowing yellow across the lawn. He would listen. Every time Ridge said no, he would listen. For the rest of his life, and for the rest of Ridge's life after that, and every day in between. He would never again make the mistake of thinking he was smarter than the dog beside him. He carried Millie inside first, tucked her into her bed, kissed her forehead, and pulled her quilt up under her chin. Then he came back out for Ridge, who was already at the front door waiting, medal glinting in the moonlight. Ridge trotted upstairs at Callum's heel, went to the doorway of Millie's room, turned once in a slow circle, and lay down across the threshold with his chin on his paws. Callum stood in the hallway for a long moment, watching them both. Then he turned off the light. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, do me a small favor. Give the video a like so that more people can find stories like this one. Drop a comment down below telling me about a dog you have loved or a dog you wish you had, and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another story from this channel. There are more coming, and I would hate for you to miss a single one.